Welcome everybody. We continue our sustainability series on Earth Day, or the day after Earth Day. And we have a special guest, my friend David Baumann. He and I were roommates in college 20 years ago in Spain. And I know he does a great job in sustainability, and I decided to invite him, and he accepted. So this is going to be a good conversation. David is the Director of Data and Innovation at FarmTrace, where he leads the creation of science-based methodologies and projects that give way to natural climate solutions. FarmTrace is a part of Taking Root, a leading nonprofit that fosters international reforestation and foresting projects. Prior to joining FarmTrace, David served 5 years as senior analyst at Dusky Energy Consulting, one of the premier consulting firms in demand response and energy efficiency programs. David has 12 years of experience in analysis and data-informed climate policy, and he came up with the database that Taking Root uses to analyze and study carbon forest project management. He's from Kentucky. Now he lives in Canada, right? And he has 2 kids. So welcome, David. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thanks, Rodrigo. It's a real pleasure. Thanks everyone for joining. I promise that this will stay professional. It won't just be me and Rodrigo reminiscing on our years as college roommates. So yeah, and also it's a real honor to be speaking on Earth Day, which I believe was 2 days ago. So thanks.
Yeah, Wednesday, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's start with a quick question. Do you still play the trumpet?
I do. Well, no, I don't play the trumpet. I managed to play for a couple years in Quebec. I even got into a big festival with this band. But then after the festival and a couple other gigs, they asked me to either concentrate more on me being in the band or that I wasn't a good fit. So I decided that it was best that I wasn't a good fit. So I'm a trumpet player, but not a professional, as you can probably hear. And then I had 2 kids, so I don't play much anymore, unfortunately.
Right. Dave, you have lived in many places, so I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Salamanca, Austin, Montreal, or Kentucky, and why?
Wow. I mean, as they say in Kentucky, you can take a Kentucky boy out of Kentucky, but you can't take the Kentucky out of the boy. So I guess I'll have to say Kentucky just to remain faithful to my roots, despite all the amazing aspects of Canada, Spain, and Texas. I'll have to say Kentucky. We have a home spirit, bluegrass music, bourbon, which I do stereotypically really enjoy, and yeah, my friends and family are from there, so I don't know if I'll ever go back there, but it's definitely my preferred place.
All right. So last week we talked with the folks at DC Greenbank, and they are working and striving to transform the financial culture of sustainability from the supply side of the capital market. Mm-hmm. I know you work for a long time on Dunsky, who work on the demand side. Would you mind explaining what is a demand side management and modeling, and what it means to?
Yeah, and sure. So we worked a lot on demand side management. Essentially, demand side management. A lot of times when we think about energy, we think about the supply side. We think about coal plants. We think about solar panels. We think about hydro plants, as we have in lots of in Quebec, hydro energy. But the demand side is the other end of the equation. Supply and demand. It's the kilowatt hours that are actually the kilowatt hours or the natural gas molecules that are actually being consumed to run energy consuming devices. So instead of, if you look at the demand side, you say, okay, what's the best way for us to manage demand? We can do 2 things. We can reduce it. So if you think about demand, it's actually in a curve. Some parts of the day you have more demand, some parts of the day you have less. You can either shift the curve down, or you can, and that would be the reduction. So I'm going to reduce the demand side. I'm going to reduce my energy consumption through installing a LED light bulb or something. You can also do demand response programs, which is where you can shift demand. So let's say we have lots and lots of demand at 5 p.m. when everybody turns on their kettle. This is actually true in England. They have a demand problem at 5 p.m. when everybody comes home and makes tea for themselves. You can actually shift that demand so that not everybody is using the demand at the same time. You can do that through programs like cycling air conditioners on and off. That's sort of a traditional way of managing demand. You can also cycle heaters on and off. I have baseboard heaters at home, and we can turn those on and off depending on demand. And a consumer will get a incentive for that type of program. Now, this is really important for the clean energy transition, because essentially by not using this kilowatt hour, you're not burning fossil fuels. You're not often burning fossil fuels to actually generate it. And we call this a negawatt. So instead of a megawatt, it's a negawatt. It's a kilowatt, or a unit of energy that wasn't consumed. So it's really important in the clean energy transition for many reasons, but I want to give a good example. So solar panels, as many of you probably know, don't produce a base load all day long. So when you have a solar panel, you're going to get more energy being produced from that solar panel, usually in the mid-afternoon. However, if you look at consumers' energy consumption, you can see that there's actually not a lot of energy needed in many climates in the mid-afternoon. You want it again in the morning when you wake up, and again when you get home to your homes. Therefore, we can use DSM to help, again, shift the load to when solar power is being used. That can be done through the use of batteries, for example. So you can have batteries on a solar panel that absorb all this energy and then are put back onto the grid at the time when it's needed. You can also just lower the curve generally, which means that this wind and solar that's being put on the grid are the primary sources of energy. You don't have to fire up a natural gas plant or some other dirty source of energy in order to meet demand. So again, it's a critical and often overlooked part of the clean energy transition. And again, my theory behind that is that it tends to be less sexy than installing a solar panel or putting in a wind turbine. But at the end of the day, energy efficiency and demand response are incredibly important, and for moving ahead a more sustainable climate future.
Thank you. Thank you. So you were in Danske for a long time. Then you became the director of innovation of FarmTrace. How long ago? 3 months ago?
Yeah, 3 months ago.
Excellent. And this is part of Taking Root, right?
Exactly. FarmTrace, to be clear, FarmTrace is it's a technology spin-off of Taking Root. Taking Root is a project developer principally in Nicaragua. We develop carbon offset projects through forestry, and we also sell those offsets on the market. FarmTrace is a technology spin-off that is a monitoring and evaluation sort of web app / mobile app for collecting data on these projects.
All right. So Taking Root's theory of change is predicated on another not so sexy idea, right? That is that the cause of deforestation is people's pursuit of economic opportunities. I quote from your website.
Yep.
And this is, again, often overlooked. We tend to overlook that what causes people to deforest or to exploit the forest is precisely looking for economic opportunities. Would you care to develop or elaborate on your theory of change?
Sure. So this is really important and at the heart of what we do at Taking Root. So when we think about tree planting, a lot of times in the global north, we're thinking about planting trees on an area of land that isn't being used for other economic opportunities. So, let's say I have like sort of a large field, some hectares of land in my backyard that I want to reforest. I'm not using that for anything else. I'm just going to plant some trees, right? So that's what we tend to think of. Like, I would love to plant more trees. Trees are good for the environment. They capture carbon. They provide biodiversity and other ecosystem positive impacts. However, in the global south, where trees are actually really effective at capturing carbon, a lot of times, much of the land is being used for economic opportunities. So you can't. It's sort of unjust and economically infeasible to go onto a farmer's land. So in this case, I'm going to define farmer as a smallholder. These are holders of land, farmers who tend to have small amounts of land and tend to utilize this land for economic opportunity. So they grow cacao, they grow coffee, they grow fruit, etc. A lot of this land has opportunity to be reforested without affecting their economic opportunities or to give them a new economic opportunity. Without affecting their economic opportunities means taking sun-grown coffee and converting it into shade-grown coffee. So you get the carbon benefits, you're adding trees, but they still are able to extract the economic opportunity of coffee from their land. There's also opportunities to build new markets. So if our first project, which is in Nicaragua, is basically on a bunch of farmers down there tend to have a lot of land that is unproductive. So the idea is to plant trees on their land, capture carbon credits for them in the short term, and in the long term, sustainably harvest some of the trees to sell in the market. So again, aligning economic opportunities with climate solutions is the best approach for sort of addressing the problem while ensuring that people's livelihoods are maintained.
So this is mainly for commercial crops and things that can be integrated into the market. Are there programs that serve for non-commercial crops, perhaps more oriented to food sovereignty?
So yes and no. I actually I gave an example of how we can take something that is not commercialized, such as wood. So in our project in Nicaragua, there was no market, there's no commercial opportunity for the trees that are being planted. However, what we can do, one of the theories of change, is to actually take the trees that are planted and build a market for that. So you can, like, for example, we have a wood shop in Nicaragua to build that market for these farmers in the long term. The issue with only selling carbon credits, so the issue with working with a non-commercial crop, is that carbon offsets, if you're going to convince a farmer to plant trees, and you're going to say, we're going to get carbon offsets from you planting these trees, the issue there is the carbon offset size has to be large enough for the trees to remain permanent on their land. Mm-hmm. So a carbon offset right now will go in the market, let's say if you buy a carbon offset on the market, you're probably going to spend between like $10 and $15 wholesale. I can guarantee you that $10 or $15 for a Nicaraguan farmer over 30 years is not enough. I mean, we're talking about different scales here, where $10 goes a lot farther, but $10 does not go far enough over the lifetime of a tree for us to assure that tree stays in the ground. So as much as possible, we don't want to sort of pigeonhole our project into only working with commercial crops. But the fact of the matter is, if there's no market, if there's no continuous revenue coming in from these projects through the commercialization of crops, right now the carbon market isn't providing the pricing that can ensure the permanence of trees over the long term. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So you were an integral part of Taking Roots data platform, the SCPIMS. For the data geeks in the audience, and we have a few, could you explain what the database is, what it measures, and how you use it to manage these forest carbon projects?
Sure, I can. As an aside, I developed the SCPIMS, which if we actually had marketing people at that point, they would have told me immediately that's a terrible name. We have a much better name now, which is Farm Trace. But the SCPIMS is literally the Smallholder Carbon Project Information Management System. It really rolls off the tongue. But anyways, I am not a marketing person, as you know. I'm sort of a data guy, and it's a database. For those of you who don't know what a database, or just have sort of a high-level understanding of it, it's essentially a series of tables. So I assume everybody knows what Excel is. Excel, a lot of times you're just working in one table, but you can add more sheets to that table, and you can join them. You can link them somehow as simply as just, pressing equals and then referencing another cell. So databases tends to be more structured. It's essentially like a big Excel worksheet, but it has more sort of structured. They call it usually the relational databases, which means that everything is related to something through a key. I won't get too more complicated with that, but to give a concrete example, in our current database, we really high level, we have different hierarchies, and each of these tables are joined throughout a hierarchy. So at the top level, we have a program. So this will give information on actually, I'm gonna start from the bottom level. We have trees, which are all in a table. They're related to monitoring plots, they're related to parcels, to producers, and then programs. And they're all related so that if I want to look at my producer table, I can query the database, basically do a quick analysis to know how many trees are in that are under that producer really easily through querying this database underneath this structure. Databases can also have temporal dimensions, so not just sort of hierarchies. They can have temporal dimensions, and you can also put a bunch of other interesting information. Like we have satellite imagery integrated into our database for doing remote sensing work, so doing analysis for using satellite data. So they get really complicated, but in my 2 minutes that I have to answer the question, I think I'll leave it there.
Right, and how do the farmers, the small stakeholders, access this information and benefit from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the farmers right now, we work through program technicians that are entering data from the farmers. They tend to enter in data through mobile apps. The farmers can access through a public portal about the program or about their parcels through our web app. I can't say that this is a high area of demand. The farmers tend to be more interested again in providing ecosystem services. So in plain speak, essentially just planting trees on their land because they know that that's good for their environment and receiving the carbon offset benefits. Yeah, if they're interested in seeing the results of their project and or program, they can use our web app. So we have a public facing web app. It's much more interesting. The monitoring and analysis that's done through FarmTrace is much more interesting for a couple different types of folks. It tends to be interesting for project managers or implementers, people who are actually managing the project to make sure that it's being implemented. Funders, so people who are funding these projects, and other stakeholders such as certification bodies or the general public. They tend to understanding where the trees are coming from, who the trees are being planted by, knowing the exact location of those trees are of great use for all these stakeholders for reasons that I think I'll get into later in the talk.
And you can trace in the database what you have coordinates. I imagine you can see precisely what's the carbon offset of each different tree at different latitudes, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we have so when a tree is entered into the database, they enter in the diameter at breast height was essentially it's the diameter of the tree, or the circumference of the tree, the height, and what it does in the species. And essentially, forest scientists for a long time have been creating models where if you have these three pieces of information and you have the location of the tree, you can relatively accurately calculate carbon sequestered. Now, this is so I can know from the moment a tree is planted until it's a mature tree how much carbon's in that tree, and I can and through our website, different stakeholders can actually say this tree right here has estimated, these are all estimations because they're based on models, has an estimated X number of tons sequestered in its biomass. That being said, what's really important to know is that counting trees is actually quite logistically expensive. So it's sort of like counting people, right? And I know in the States you have censuses. I don't know what the plural of that is, but which counts the population. But you also do sampling, and in Canada, actually, the Canadian statistical agency only samples because they've figured out, well, it's actually way too expensive for us to sample the whole population, to take the whole population. I'm going to do a sample. So we do the same thing with trees. Measuring 10,000 trees is going to be logistically challenging and not worth your time. We use the power of statistics to take samples and extrapolate that information to the higher levels, to the parcel level, to the program level, and to the parcel level, producer level, and the program level.
Excellent. How would you relate this to the design industry through wood supply chains?
How can you repeat the question? Like how can I elaborate on this?
Tracing wood supply chain, and how can the construction industry contribute to a higher sustainability in the chain, knowing all this information?
I unfortunately am not an expert, but I think I know enough to answer, hopefully to your satisfaction. I think you probably have people there at Moya that know just as much about this, but from my perspective, we're talking about maintaining and increasing life. Let's see what our objective is. It's our objective, if it's to maintain the livelihood of the people working in these communities. What we're looking for is traceability, right? So I want to make sure that the wood that I am purchasing is coming from a sustainable source, meaning that you're not clear cutting. It's coming from a source where there's no human rights, like social justice issues involved. A bunch of stakeholders, a bunch of smallholders haven't been kicked off their land to then replant a forest of like monoculture for the global north supply needs. So how can you as an architectural firm think about this? Well, there are tools such as farm trace that are being developed to track trees to track trees or to think about the traceability of trees from point A to point Z, from the point it's planted to the point that you purchase it in order for it to be processed and then be put into a building. While these tools are being developed, but well, it would be great for you to research these tools. Really, there's plenty of organizations that are working on these, on making sure these tools are well developed and that are in line with the sustainability, the human and environmental sustainability goals of the planet, right? So to get more concrete, think about certifications like, is the wood that I'm purchasing Rainforest Alliance certified? We're starting to work with Rainforest Alliance to some degree to integrate the farm trace platform into supply chains and make sure that the platform is therefore aligned with the certification process of Rainforest Alliance. There's a million certifications out there, and I unfortunately do not have more. I don't have tons of examples of what those are, but if you can align your purchase, your procurement with certifications that I guess are aligned with your goals, with your sustainability goals, that would be a great first step in making sure that the wood that you're purchasing is coming from a better place.
Right. So last question before we open the floor.
Sure.
Just yesterday, you announced a partnership between FarmTrace and Google.
Yep.
Would you like to elaborate on this and what's the scope of this alliance?
Sure. So we were accepted into a climate for AI, so climate for artificial intelligence startup accelerator. So FarmTrace is essentially a tech startup. We work on climate issues through a reforestation context, and we were accepted into this Google accelerator to be able to harness all of their brains in improving our machine learning and artificial intelligence approach. So we have a data scientist on staff. He's really good at what he does. And he really knows forestry, but I can guarantee you that he doesn't know some of the things that the people at Google know. So we are really honored to be part of this. I don't know what's going to result from it, but what I'm hoping, in a sort of a high level picture, is that we're going to be much better at taking satellite imagery and harnessing that satellite imagery for detecting things such as deforestation, plant growth, verification, so making sure that the data on the ground actually matches what the data from the sky, making sure that the trees are being planted, so that there's no fraud or anything amongst those lines. There's a million opportunities, and we're really excited to work with Google to harness some of those.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor now to see if the audience have any questions. Aura has one. How much of the wood supply in North America used commercially is acquired sustainably, ethically? Have an estimate?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to pull out the I could make up an answer or just tell you I don't know. And I think it's better to say I don't know. I would suspect that it's probably quite small. The industry is growing at leaps and bounds, and I think that's where you want to. That's the exciting part of it. We're hearing from stakeholders all over the planet. In fact, I was on a webinar with McDonald's the other day, which, at least historically doesn't seem to be the most sustainable food company. They're already thinking about how are we going to sustainably procure our soy and meat supplies. So yeah, I don't have a perfect I don't have a number for you, but I know that it's growing and at rapid pace.
Federico asks, are these programs more geared to a global market or focused to a local demand to the program in being put in practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that. So we are moving more towards a global market. So again, cacao and coffee tend from our market experience, cacao and coffee are what makes the most sense. The reason being is that in Latin America and Africa, where the majority of this is produced, well, I think also in Asia, but we have a presence in Latin America and in Africa. Cacao and coffee actually has a long tradition of cooperatives. The great thing about a cooperative is that you don't need to go in there and tell them hey, we have a great idea to how we can sell your coffee or your cacao. That already exists. All we have to do is go in. If all we have to do is be like, if they have a desire, or a partner has a desire to, let's say, convert sun-grown to shade coffee, we just have to go in and say, okay, we'll tell you how to do this and tell you how to monitor it so you get carbon offsets. Your global supply for your agricultural product is already there. We have worked with local demand. For example, our wood shop in Nicaragua does sell some local products, but again, it's a question of starting from the beginning and scaling up versus already having this group of 500 farmers with the supply chain already in place to sell their products. That tends to work a lot better if your objective is to plant as many trees as possible.
I have another question related to that.
Great.
Because coffee and cows are still commodities that are super frail in terms of international market. Is there any financial innovation that helps to offset these switches in the market demand?
What do you mean by frail?
Like a commodity like coffee, when there is an economic crisis, is the first thing that goes off the board. Right?
Yeah.
They are risk prone.
Yeah, they're extremely risk prone, not only from the economics of it, but also from a climate perspective. Coffee suffers from, this is a bit of an aside, but people in the coffee industry worry a lot about, I think it's called coffee rust, which essentially is a disease that's happening more commonly in the tropics because it's getting warmer. So I agree with you. A Maxwell House coffee, I don't mean to call it Maxwell House because I actually don't know about their sustainability, but I know in the past they have been they buy commodity coffee. They buy cheap coffee, and that's how they're able to sell it at a low price to the consumer. These coffees are incredibly vulnerable to the smallholders are incredibly vulnerable to price shifts in these commodity prices. How do you get away from that? You want to put a premium on them, and one of the ways you can put a premium on your coffee prices, and one of the reasons why cooperatives love the idea, many of them love the idea of signing up for something like farm trace, is that at the end of the day, a farm trace product is gonna give value to the consumer, because they're gonna be like, oh cool, on my coffee packaging I can actually scan a barcode and see exactly where this coffee comes from, it gives a value to the to the distributor and the roaster, because again, if the consumer likes it more, they're gonna pay a premium for it, et cetera, et cetera. That goes down the line. So sustainability is good for all of us in the long term, but adding this premium to the product is going to actually reduces the pricing risk for the smallholder.
Right. Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Well, so let's wrap it up.
Oh, I think there's one more if
yes.
If we have time. Do you guys get into the trade of their products, or farmers do it? Good question. We do not get into the trade of their products. Again, we have this small wood shop in Nicaragua to market the trees that we're planting there, because again, they don't have a active agroforestry industry in the area that we're planting in. But otherwise, we do not get into the trade of their products. We leave that to coffee and cacao traders that work at a much bigger scale and have much more experience than we do. But great question.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, for accepting the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for everyone for joining. I hope this was fruitful and it gives you a little insight into the world of global supply chain sustainability and traceability.
It is pretty cool. It is
Great.
pretty cool.
And I again, if that's an organizational priority, I really hope that you can look into certifications as is appropriate for like more sustainable wood procurement practices. I'm sure it will really open up your eyes into the possibilities out there.
Yep.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and participating in the talk. Thanks again to David. It's been a really nice chat. It's been good to catch up with you and with your projects. And let's hope we can talk again.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. Thanks Rodrigo for the invite. It's a real pleasure, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.